Okay, today is November the 30th, 2007. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with the Oklahoma State University Library, and we're doing an oral history project called Women of the Oklahoma Legislature. And today I'm with Debbe Leftwich.
Debbie Leftwich.
D-E-B-B-E.
Yes.
And she was elected to the Senate in 2003.
That's correct.
And currently serving. So, thank you for having us today. And you do District 44, right?
Correct.
Well, let's start by having you tell a little bit about your childhood, and then we'll work forward. Where you were born.
Well, I was born in Lincoln County here in Oklahoma, the county seat called Chandler, but my parents were both from Wellston, a neighboring town about 11 miles away, and that's where I grew up, in the little town of Wellston. Again, with both of them growing up there, I think I was quite fortunate to have both sets of grandparents and lots of aunts, uncles, and cousins in a small community. It was, a lot of fun growing up in a small town. We were real big on sports, like most small towns in Oklahoma, particularly basketball back in those days. And I played a lot of sports as a child and in high school as well. There was only 31 in my graduating class, and years later, looking back, I think that was really a unique experience to have those small classes. We got a lot of one-on-one with our teachers. We had an awful lot of good teachers. I even had a couple that taught my mother, which I always thought was kind of funny, and she always had a hard time getting my name right. She'd call me my mother's name instead, 2/3 of the time. But my first grade teacher, I loved school, and my first grade teacher, just so happened she was the sister of an uncle of mine. He had married one of my aunts, and so she was kind of family, and I was a teacher's pet, and that was pretty cool. And then I had another 2 or 3 other teachers in grade school that I just really thought a lot of, and one I'm still in Wellston. I still see her on rare occasions when I'm down there. And
Siblings?
Siblings, I have one brother. He's 2 years older than me, and so we're pretty close, I'm happy to say, after all these years.
And after high school, you went where to college?
I went to Oklahoma Baptist University, and that's where my brother was at the time, too. And I only went there for 3 semesters before our dad had an accident, and he was injured and laid off work for about a year, and so I dropped out of school and went to work. Yeah.
And how early were you interested in political issues?
Actually, that probably started younger than I can even, I've thought about that question. I've been asked that before. I know my real interest really surged in high school, but I probably had a little bit of interest before that. I remember teachers in grade school even would have us bring articles from the paper once in a while in the 5th and 6th grade level, and talk about civics, events of the day, and that stuff was just real interesting to me. But it really kind of got its feet wet, I guess if you call it, in high school. My freshman year, I had a teacher that encouraged me to take speech. And some of the kids in the speech class then were also involved in student government, so the next year I ran for student government. And that's really what got me interested in it.
Did your parents discuss politics around the dinner table?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Yeah, they did.
So that helped, I guess.
Well, they did, and I was always interested in the grown-up talks. And
you remember your first election where you got to vote?
Yes, I do, and I can tell you, you had to be 21 years old to vote back then. That dates me a little. And the year that they lowered it to 18 was the year I turned 21. I was so mad that all those 18-year-olds got to vote, and I had to wait. I remember that real well. I couldn't wait to vote. I just thought it was one of the best things in life, I had been involved a little bit in some local campaigns through people I knew, or relatives, or like one of my best girlfriends, her uncle ran for county sheriff one year, and we'd go out on Saturdays and put up signs and do leaflets in small towns. And back in those days, they would actually do a little county caravan, they'd call them, and you'd go from town to town, because Saturday was a big deal in small town Oklahoma. Everybody went to town on Saturdays. They'd have a little local drawing or a local something on the town square, or and so everybody would go to town. It was a big, big deal, and that was a good time for campaigns to hit those little towns at that particular time of day, to do their campaign work.
Shake hands and move on to the next
right.
one.
Yeah, to get ready to get through there and move on to the next town, yeah.
Well, then take us up to the point when you decided to run for this seat.
Well, that was a very long journey. I was not involved in student government in OBU. It wasn't big in a Bible college. Back then anyway, there was no active young political groups. And so I really didn't get too involved till I was out of school a couple of years when an OBU professor I had a couple of classes with ran for governor. His name's David Bourne.
Okay.
And I think almost everybody that went to OBU any time during that period did something in his campaign. I mean, there were so many young people involved in his campaign for governor. And it was such a huge grassroots movement. And again, when you couple that with the factor of so many young people being involved, that was pretty exciting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I worked on that campaign. But after he was elected, my life kind of took a few other directions, and I wasn't too politically involved till 2 years later. I got married shortly after that, and then I got divorced shortly after that. So that kind of took up a lot of time. And it wasn't until I met my second husband that I got involved in politics again. And it was because he had ran for office before I had met him. And he had been involved in politics since he was a young child. His mother had been an activist, and I think she drug him to every political meeting that she ever went to, and he was her only child. And so he grew up with it far more than I did. And he had been active with Young Democrats at OU, where he went to college down in Norman, and had done worked in a lot of Senate races out in Choctaw, Mid-Dale City area. He grew up in Choctaw. So, and he had ran for a House seat once before I met him, like I said. So when we first met, he told me he was going to run for office again. He just didn't know when, you know. And so it was just the year after we got married. We hadn't been married a year when he ran again for a House seat. He won that one. And so that threw both of us in, you know, to being just really active with his campaign. I got involved with the local Democrat Women's Club, got involved with the party. I had never been involved with the party before, but I decided I wanted to do that because I wanted to help him. And that really started. He was in the legislature in the House for 6 years, 3 terms. Then he decided to run for a statewide office. He ran for corporation commissioner in 1988, but he lost in the primary runoff election, and worked for the Dale City Chamber for a couple of years, and then he ran for the Senate in 1990 and was elected. And then he passed away in 2003, and that's when I decided to run for his Senate seat shortly after his passing.
So he served another 13 years.
Another 13 years. So 20 of the 22 years we were married,
Yes.
he was in politics.
And your fingers were in it too. didn't they?
Absolutely. So that was just a way of life in our household.
So how did your first campaign differ from the ones you had helped him for himself? Did it differ any difference?
Oh, first of all, it's different when you're the candidate, pure and simple.
Yeah, sure.
You know, it's just a whole lot different than being a spouse. Secondly, it was a special election. It was late in the year. It started in October. We only had 8 weeks to run a special election, where normally you're in it around 5 months. So you cram 5 months into 8 weeks.
You don't see much.
You don't. It's very fast paced. You've got a lot of information to get out in a short period of time to the voters. And special elections are tough anyway because not that many people turn out on special elections. You've really got to work the voters to get them to turn out to vote.
So then when you ran for a full session, or
Well, I ran again. I filed last year in 2006, and there was only one individual that filed against me, and then he withdrew. So I did not have a race last year, and no one was more shocked than me.
and happy, I guess, too.
Absolutely. I could go help some friends.
Man, I can't ask more questions about strategies and slogans. Did you have a slogan in those 8 weeks?
In those 8 weeks?
Yeah.
Not really.
Not time?
Not really. During that kind of period, I know it was a very sad period for my family. It was, and for a lot of supporters of his too. That basically, a lot of them knew me. I had been that involved with his political, career, and I think just was the message I gave them that pretty much if they trusted me and elected me, that I would continue to, vote and do the same things he did, vote the same way and represent that district in the same manner, and I guess they liked it because they elected me.
Tell a little bit about your campaign sign. I read somewhere where it's just a little different from his, but
One's right behind you.
it was sweet, I thought.
I wanted my sign to be almost identical to his. But no, I didn't want to confuse the voters. Now, he always had a theme. He was the walking candidate. When he ran in '82, when we first got married, or after we got married, he put a big footprint on his signs, big man's footprint, you know, because he was the walking candidate, that he knocked every door, and believe you me, he did back in those days. Got a little tougher as we all got older. He walked every door, and so that was his title, or not title, but his nickname or slogan. He was the walking candidate, but that meant that he was close to the people, that he was out in the district, and he was, you know, talking to them at their doors, listening to their concerns, and always available, and that was kind of what that symbolized. And so what I wanted to do is, and he never put his first name on the sign, so I put my first name above the name Leftwich, kept the same color, and I put a woman's footprint. Even though 8 weeks is not enough time to walk an entire Senate district, you know, it was just the symbol that I would remain close to the people in every way that I possibly could, that they were used to and accustomed to, and, you know, deserved, quite frankly.
And it worked.
Yeah, it worked.
On election day, tell a little bit about what you might have been doing or thinking or whatever.
That was a very emotional day, and it was very cold. It was winter, December 9th, and it had snowed that morning. And I had volunteers out waving signs at corners, and I was at the corner nearest to my house, but it was so cold. We were all bundled up. You couldn't tell who we were because of all the layers of clothing and coats and mittens, and out waving signs and waving at voters, and it was freezing to death. And you know, that part was still kind of fun and exciting, because even though it was cold, I was concerned that some of my voters may not turn out because it was getting pretty slick outside, and we had telephone poles running all day trying to get people out to vote. And we were offering rides to the polls and type of normal things, campaigns we always did anyway. And it was, some of them were saying, I'm just not getting out in this unless it really clears up. Well, it didn't clear up very well. So I knew I lost some votes that, you know, due to the weather. But I remember a little bit later that day, it dawned on me that, and I knew this, but I just hadn't focused on it in a while. But because when the governor had announced what day the election was going to be held on, shortly after Keith passed away, that was the exact day we had met in 1980, December 9th.
It was meant to be then, huh?
It was just almost like that's, you know, kind of like a little sign or something, if you believe in those things. But to me, that was just so symbolic too, that I was elected on the same day we had met, you know, years earlier.
Destiny.
I think so. I really do. I'm part Irish, so.
Well, do you live close enough to where you don't have to commute a long distance when session's going, or do you have to rent? Oh, you're from...
I live here in the city.
You're in city.
Yeah, I'm here in Oklahoma City, so.
Some people have to...
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Have to rent apartments or whatever while
No.
they're here. Okay, do you remember swearing in day?
Yes, I do. Because my family was up here with me, and especially my father, who had never been to the state capitol in his entire life.
Really? Not till that day?
Not till that day. But he came up, and I had him hold the Bible while I was sworn in by Justice Apollo, who had been a good friend of my mother-in-law's too, my late husband's mother. They had known each other real well years ago. So that was another bittersweet day.
When you drive in, do you drive down Lincoln?
I drive down Lincoln, I get off on 23rd, and I love that route, and here's why. It's just, you just almost top that hill to get off on 23rd Street exit. Mm-hmm. That's when you see the dome, you see the Capitol building then. Mm-hmm. Kind of like over the horizon, you know, and it's just kind of unique, and
Sets off the day for a good start.
I think it does.
Mm-hmm. I get that when I come off of the interstate this way too, even though
Mm-hmm.
I don't work here. It's nice. Okay, describe a typical day. How early do you get here and during session?
Oh, during session?
During session.
Well, that varies depending on what time all the meetings are starting. You know, early in session we have committee meetings, but then you got appointments before and after. So typically I'm here anywhere between 8 and 9 o'clock at the latest. And whether I've got a meeting set up here in the office, or then the committee meetings start, and then you're just back and forth. You're in meetings all the time, just about, if not with committees, with groups, with individuals. about a number of things, mainly legislation, but there's still a lot of things that are going on. Constituents, that come up to the Capitol, and you want to take time out of your busy day to go talk to them and greet them and have a photo op or whatever. That's one of the fun parts. And during session, last couple of years, we all put in some pretty long hours. Even before we start having much activity on the floor, when we're still basically in committee meetings, there's still so many other things that we're doing, working on legislation, that it's not unusual for me not to get home before 8 or 9 o'clock at night.
Ooh. More than a 40-hour week, then.
Well, it really is. I've often kind of joked in a way, but it's really true that if you're really out here doing the people's business, you're going to be clocking in 40 hours at least before noon on Thursday. And then on weekends, on Fridays and Saturdays, we are all in our districts, going to meetings with your local civic groups or chamber groups or church groups or whatever that have meetings and events that they want you there for. So it doesn't stop when you're not in this office or in that chamber. Not to mention all the calls you have to return.
So have you had the same assistants the entire time?
Yes, and I've been very, very fortunate because Jerry worked for my late husband for about 6 or 7 years. And so not only did she know the ropes, she grew up in South Oklahoma City. She graduated from U.S. Grant. And so I always said she probably knows more people than I do. And in fact, when I decided to run, I had a little conversation with her, and I said, if I do this and win, I want you to stay, or I'm not going to do it. I wasn't a dummy.
It's worked out well, too.
Yes, it has.
Do you recall the first day you debated a bill on the floor?
Ooh, first day I debated a bill. Hopefully it was one of my own. I'd have to stop thinking about that because I carried.
Maybe if you can't remember that, maybe a memorable experience of debating a bill on the floor.
Well, I know one of the first bills I passed, my first session, was very memorable because it was a big, important bill, and I was very lucky. Absolutely lucky to be a part of that. It originated in the House, however, because I had already missed the deadline to file bills when I was elected. So I didn't have any Senate bills that first year, but I got asked to be Senate author on some House bills. And that particular one was with Representative Danny Hilliard, who had been here in the House for a while. He was in leadership at the time, and I had known him, of course. And he was working on a cancer bill. His mother had died of breast cancer. And I had some friends of mine working with the American Cancer Society on the bill that came and asked me if I would be the Senate author. And of course I jumped on it right away. But also realized it was a very big endeavor, that not only was it going to affect women in Oklahoma that were underinsured or uninsured women for breast and cervical cancer treatment, it was going to take some money. It's big money, and I sure wasn't in a position. I said I may have gotten my husband's Senate seat, but his seniority did not transfer to me. And so right away I went and enlisted the help of the First Lady. She had come out and helped me campaign one weekend, and which I will always, treasure that time with her and be grateful to her. And I went to her about it because I found out we were the only state in the nation that was not participating in a federal matching program, that we could get federal money. And in fact, it was a 4-to-1 match. And boy, her eyes lit up like mine did. A 4-to-1 match. And I thought, how come we're not doing this? And we got it done through her efforts. And it was on the governor's agenda, and we got that bill through that year and got that program started then in 2005. And so that was huge for me, especially being a freshman legislator. And that was pretty exciting. And I've since been on the advisory council that oversees that in the health department, the screening and and I chair it now, the screening and the treatment. And that program is just going great guns. There's many more women than we ever thought we'd be serving in Oklahoma. And it's just a wonderful feeling to be a part of that.
What other committees are you on?
Well, right now, because it's changed since I started a little bit. But for example, I co-chair Business and Labor, and I was chairing Business and Labor before we had the split in the Senate, so I co-chair it now. But I co-chair with a very good friend of mine who was my vice chair before, so that committee gets along real well. So I chair that committee, or co-chair that committee, and then I'm also on Human Resources, which is Health and Human Resources Committee, and I'm on Transportation, and I'm also on the Public Safety Subcommittee, Sub-Appropriation Committee, and I'm on a Criminal Jurisprudence Committee, which is a relatively new one that they created last year. So when you're on, yeah, that's a lot to keep you busy, but also when you're in public office, you do get asked to serve on a number of other boards and commission type things, and so I've gotten involved with, I'm involved with a group called Skill, which helps children that are in high school that, for a number of reasons, are living independently. We help them live independent, and we help them finish high school and try to get them into college or VOTEC or something like that. And then I'm on this advisory council for the Breast and Cervical Cancer Committee, and I'm on 2 or 3 other committees like that, or that may or may not be directly related with state government, but it's a role that legislators do play, and that takes up a lot of other time too, but it's important work, and you're just kind of have to be asked to do some of that stuff. I got asked here recently to work on a YMCA board that I've helped them with. They do an annual retreat at the Capitol. They bring kids to the city from all around the state, and juniors and seniors in high school. They come up here and have a mock session in the House and the Senate, and they pass legislation and stuff. 'Cause I've been hosting them ever since I've been up here, and so they asked me to be on their board now, which I think's a neat deal. And I've always been at a breakfast they have every year during that time where they have a panel of legislators, and we actually talk to them about some of their legislative questions, or if they're wanting to propose legislation, get our take on it, and we get their take on some bills we passed, and it's a really fun exchange. Because these are really bright kids. I just really have fun doing that.
Well, what can you see yourself doing after your 12 years, after you've turned out?
Yeah.
No.
At my age, retiring.
I don't know.
I don't know. I've thought about that, and I honestly am not 100% sure what I'd be doing. I think that more than likely I'm still going to be involved in something political.
Mm-hmm.
I love working campaigns. I think that's probably the old athlete in me, the competitive edge, the competitiveness of a campaign. And I've worked in a lot of other people's campaigns, and I think I'd probably still do that to some degree, whether it's actual managing or consulting or, advising or something like that. I'd probably still be involved in campaign work. Consulting, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you have a mentor? Have you had a mentor other than your husband, I guess? Who's probably your biggest one, but
yeah.
Since you were elected, let's do that, I guess.
Oh, since I was elected, I was reaching back mentors.
Well, that's okay. Do both if you want.
Well, I had a high school teacher that was my mentor that got me involved in student government and, through speech class and debate and stuff like that. I had a mentor who was a retired teacher that was a mentor as far as some of the work I was doing in the party at the time with the Democrat women, and I was state president for a few years, and she had been state president. She'd been state president of the retired teachers too, and so she just knew everybody. I swear, I mean, this lady was phenomenal. I really adored her. She's been gone for some time now, and as far as since I've been here, that's one thing I think women are a little short of on role models. Because let's face it, we don't have very many women in the legislature. We've got a few more just since I came in, But as far as the Senate, I mean, we still just have a handful, 6. Mm-hmm.
There's 19 total, I think, for both.
Right. At one time we had, I think, 22 last year before. So, but before that, it was down the single digits. And so there's still a lot of women in our state's history, I think, we can draw back on that were trailblazers and
any of those come to mind?
Oh, well, I was even talking about one when we went to Guthrie a couple weeks ago for the centennial. I said, to me that was a very moving day, being part of our state centennial and being one of the few women in the legislature taking that train to Guthrie and all that, and being in a special session that they had up there that day. And one of the reporters asked me about the significance of being a woman. I said, well, gosh, when Oklahoma became a state, women couldn't even vote. And here we are in the legislature. We could still use a few more. and one of the gentlemen that was sitting nearby said, and do you know who that lady was? I knew he knew, and he was just seeing if I knew. I said, yes, that was Kate Bernard. As far as I made the comment rather about we already had one woman who'd been elected before women could even vote. You know, that was Kate Bernard. So
Statues downstairs.
yes, statues downstairs by the south entrance.
I've learned that since I've started this project too. I didn't-
Yeah, there's a really neat history about her time in office too. If you've ever read it, if you haven't, you need to read it. It's pretty neat.
And I guess the first Senator House, one of them was Alice Robertson
Right.
and Mrs. Lamar Mooney.
Lamar Mooney.
Yeah, and then there was a gap, considerable number of
Considerable
years.
gap. Yeah, here that was back in the 20s.
Yeah,
And-
until the 60s, I guess, maybe.
There was one lady in the Senate, I believe, or was it the House? Betsy somebody. Her picture's out here in the hallway. I can't think of her last name. But she's a relative, I think, of Glenn Coffey, Senator Coffey's wife,
Oh.
if I remember correctly.
So in your freshman class, how many women, were there any other women? Was it
Well, I
you
didn't
came
really
in
have a
fresh
freshman
election?
class, so,
Yeah.
you know. Although I was the third special election that year, so we three kind of have our own little class.
Any of the other two men or women?
2 men.
Two men.
Hmm.
Do you know, can you talk about any other gender differences you've noticed? And if there are any?
I think there are. You know, I'll be very blunt. I think we still probably exist in a. It's just not relevant to the Senate or the House or Legislature in general. I mean, I can draw on this from working as an administrator in a state agency or a administrator in a private company. Before that there's still the boys' club. The inner circle is still pretty much the boys' club. And that's not going to change until we have a woman governor or a woman pro tem or a woman speaker.
Or more women, period.
And more women, period. That's not going to happen if you have more women. It's just not. And there's been a few times that I've felt that women weren't taken as seriously up here because of gender. You know, because there are still some that don't think women should be in office. It's hard to believe in this century that there are, but there's still some of that sentiment that does exist. And I'm a study of people. Doing personnel work like I did for years, I studied people. You know, they can say all they want to. Their actions tell me a lot more. You know.
Well, do the women tend to group together and have the good old women's
Well,
club then?
you know, we really didn't when I was first out here, and then a couple years ago, I decided to help organize a women's caucus. We've started to have enough to have a little caucus to maybe do a few things and or help each other, support each other when we can. You know, having partisan differences at times, might not allow that, but there's a number of things that we can help each other on. So we formed a women's caucus. Now, we didn't do much this last session, but I've got some plans for them this year. And it was so funny, I remember when we first had one of our first meetings, it got all the guys' attention, like, what are they up to, just kind of. In fact, when I noticed that a couple times that session, I did this just for the heck of it. We wouldn't have a meeting scheduled, but I would announce it on the floor. At the end of the session, they have you time for announcements. And I would announce women's caucus is meeting in whatever room. We'd just go stand in there and laugh and giggle because we knew they were just, what are they up to now? And one of the gentlemen over in the house commented, one of the house members said, well, maybe we should just create a men's caucus too. I said, you've had one for almost 100 years.
And how did he respond to that?
He just stopped. He said, well, I said, it's true.
One of the things that some of the women have said that the chamber temperature is set for men instead of women, and they freeze.
Mm-hmm.
Too many layers of suits and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Well, that's why I've started wearing more pantsuits myself, because it does get chilly out there. It does.
Well, what advice would you have for a female that's considering running for office?
What advice? I always tell them, well, actually, I would probably give them much of the same advice I would give a male candidate to some degree. Because first of all, don't do this unless it's something you really want to do. Don't let people talk you into it for their reasons. do this because it's something you really want to do, that you've got a genuine interest, that you've got a genuine desire to serve the people. That, because I don't think you can be as effective if you're not. And that you've also got to sit down and discuss with your immediate family the impact it's going to have. I do some kind of reality check with my candidates I work with and tell them, during the campaign season, you're not going to be home very much. And you've got to sit down with your spouse or partner or whatever and say, okay, no, you're going to have to, while I'm doing campaign work, someone's got to fill in the slack of whatever I do at home. Whether it's with the kids or different duties, chores, whatever. You've really got to realize that person's going to be gone an awful lot during the campaign season because they've got to be out meeting voters and raising money. And that's another thing. You've got to not be bashful about asking for money. And that's one of the things that I hear from men and women candidates that's hard for them. But I think particularly for women, because there's just, again, not that many of us, and asking for money. But you've got to be willing to ask for money. They're more likely going to give to the candidate than someone else asking. And you've got to learn how to close deals. And when I say close deals, I mean get that person's commitment. Will you support me? Simple as yes or no. Because maybe I'll get back to you, but you got to learn how to close those deals and get people to know that I'm serious about this and this is what I'm going to do.
Any training out there for that sort of thing?
Pardon?
Any training for that? Nothing but hands-on, I guess, right?
Hands-on. Now, there are some candidate training workshops that different groups do nowadays, and I even put one on one year through the party. So there's different venues to learn some of that, but there is absolutely nothing that will replace hands-on experience. And I like having, especially if someone new interested, come work in a campaign, see what it's really like. If I can't get you involved in one that I'm involved in, I'll introduce you to someone else. And just get involved and do it yourself. There's just no better experience whatsoever to get in and work with someone or with a group of people that have done this before.
What would your biggest challenge? Is it money then?
Money is the biggest challenge, I still believe, for women. I really do. And I think that, and it's not that some of the contributors don't take us serious, it's just a lot of them are hedging their bets on who's going to win. Everybody wants to support a winner, and they're not so sure the women candidates out there are going to win. But I'm encouraged in this particular time in our history that I'm seeing more interest in female candidates, even since I ran. And so I think that's about to change. I think the public overall is just genuinely more interested in, I'm talking local races probably more, because that's the more I'm personally involved in, but I see them being so much more receptive to women candidates. And so we just got to find women candidates that want to be willing to put that time and effort into it. It's hard too to struggle the family life. If you're young and you've got children, I'm not sure I would have wanted to do this when my kids were little. That's got to be one of the worst things. It was hard enough having my husband do it, and I was home alone a lot with him, but unless one of the parents is there filling this role, that's going to be very, very hard. We got a lot of single mothers this day and age. So unless they've got a family support group somehow, that's a tough call.
And then you get down to the geography aspect of it too, if they're even from Tulsa. So
yeah, but even your rural communities, whereas Oklahoma City or Tulsa, we're more compact. Our districts are right here. Where out in rural Oklahoma, they're spread out everywhere. They could go over 3 or 4 counties. So that's something to consider also.
Were you the first woman to hold your district's seat?
No, I'm the second one. Kay Dudley was the first one. Senator Kay Dudley, she replaced Marvin York back in 1986.
27 years old in between.
Yeah, she was the one my husband beat in 1990.
Well, I suppose you're friends with her, or at least cordial.
And yes, absolutely. And one of the representatives that took came after him in his House seat, it was House District 91, was Alice Musser. Okay. She had that seat for one 1 or 2 terms, I think. So there's been a couple other women out in that part of town.
I haven't interviewed either one of those yet. They're on my list.
Oh, well, you're going to love them. They're both darling gals. And Sharp, oh, let me tell you. Of course, Kay served as Governor Keating's appointment secretary when he was governor. Alice has been real involved with senior groups and other activities. She's still remained active.
Well, it's nice that or you're aware of some of the other ones that came before you.
Oh, absolutely,
I don't
yeah.
know what kind of history they keep of the House and Senate, but it's nice. That's kind of the gap we're going to hope to fill too.
Well, of course, when my husband was first elected to the House, he was seatmates with Freddie Williams, who was representative from northeast Oklahoma City. Great gal. She was the one that pushed through the mammograms being covered by insurance companies, and I remember that tough battle way back then in the late 80s. So I had gotten to know her pretty well back then too. And of course, Angela Munson, who served in the House and the Senate. I did get to serve with her at least for a couple of years.
You stay in touch with the ones that are.
I still see Angela once in a while, yeah. Of course, Freddie's gone, but.
And what about social networks? How, if y'all, once you're out, you just come back and stay friends? Some do and some don't, I guess, just like anything else.
Yeah, yeah.
Or any other special issues you want to go on record as having pushed for, or maybe not got?
Yeah, why
Okay.
not?
Good.
It's maybe you can all read about them someday that I finally did accomplish them.
Sure.
Of course, when I first came up here, my first goal was to finish some things that my husband wanted to finish his last term.
Mhm.
He had just gotten reelected in 2002 before he became ill. And so one of the programs that took me 2 sessions to complete it was the graduated driver's license for teenagers, because he'd worked on that for a couple of years before that. And so I worked on that pretty hard and got that done. The other one was a trucking bill that he had, and this was one I had a hard time following, so I at least got some other senators involved in it, and we were able to get that done. It was to help the kind of a one-stop shop for truckers to get licenses and other things in one agency instead of spread out over 2 or 3, and which was just costly and time-consuming, and and so they did get that done. Another group did that. A couple that I haven't finished yet is on driver's license programs in public schools. We had them for years, then we quit having them. Then they started coming back, now they're gone again. And that's because of the money in the driver's license education fund. And I'm going to try to work on that again this year. Because it's a reimbursement program. If schools don't get reimbursed sufficiently, they're not going to carry the program, pure and simple. So I'm going to look at that. Another one is that I've started, that Keith did work on some, was trying to create a aging department to consolidate all of senior services, because right now they're spread out over 6 or 7 agencies.
Mm-hmm.
And that just doesn't make any sense to me. And this is something very high on senior groups list, your Department of your area-wide aging, your Silver-Haired Legislature, and other senior groups, OOHRP. This is pretty high on their list. And so I've had that bill out there for a couple of years, and I'm still working on it. I think we're going to see a little movement on it this year. I really do. We've got some additional groups involved and interested, and some more legislators interested in it too. Another one is domestic violence. I've got a real passion for domestic violence as far as trying to, do something about it in Oklahoma. It just gets me that it's still a misdemeanor for a first-time offense. And if anyone knows anything about domestic violence, it's happened more than once before it ever gets to court, before there's ever charges filed. It is a violent crime, first and foremost, and yet we are not making that first offense a felony. But yet we're filling up our prisons with all these nonviolent offenders. So I have a real problem with that. And one of the scenarios I use is, well, in Oklahoma, it's a felony to own a fighting rooster or fight dogs, but it's not it's a misdemeanor to hit your wife.
Well,
I'm hoping all the time I'm here that Oklahoma's going to stand up and say enough's enough, that we're not going to have any tolerance for domestic violence, and help me push that through the legislature and get that done. And in addition to that, though, it's important to also give some economic security to victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And that's another bill that I've been working on.
So they can leave if they choose to.
Yes, and that they can not be afraid to, take off work and do things they need to do, like go to court and relocate and other things like that, to give them a little, because a lot of them don't think they have that safety net, and more times than not they will quit a job rather than try to explain or get time off from their employers. And I think we just had a little safety net there to encourage the employers to get a little more proactive, and that they'd feel a little safer in doing so, the victims would, and that they could work and help each other. So I've had one bill that's flown around a few times here, made it out of the Senate, didn't make it through the House, that I'm going to revisit this year, and I'm going to rewrite it just a little bit. I've looked at what some other states are doing, and so I'm going to try to tweak it a little to make it a little more.
You actually rewrite it yourself, or you?
Oh, I give it to staff, but I tell them what I want, the ideas I want put in it, and they do the actual language.
And then you do some of your own research to prepare to tell them
Yes.
what you want in.
Yes, I do.
And I need to learn more about how the bill starts, just an idea, and then you work it forward, and it may take a year or two, evidently.
Well, sometimes it does,
Or
yeah.
longer to get it.
Sometimes,
all the way
yeah.
through.
So, and in addition to that, I've worked with the American Cancer Society. We also have a cancer caucus out here too. And again, I lost my husband to cancer, and so I'm going to be very involved in every cancer issue there is out here while I'm here, among other health issues. But I've introduced a bill last year to require insurance companies to cover colonoscopies,
That's a good thing.
and this is big on the American Cancer Society's list too. And because, well, for a number of reasons, but first and foremost, it's one of the few that you can actually, in fact, it's the only cancer that I've read up so far that you can actually prevent. You do a colonoscopy, you see polyps, you remove them, you prevent that patient from having cancer. It's the polyps that turn into the cancer. And insurance companies have fought it, and so we haven't gotten it done yet. And some say that they do cover it, but here's how they get around it. They say they will cover it if you're symptomatic or you have family history. Well, there's enough statistics now to show family history doesn't hold water. Because a lot of them that get it don't have family history. Symptomatic, this particular type of cancer, if you wait till it's really detected, you're in late stage cancer. So the chance of your survival is pretty small. And if we screen, we can save 80-90% of these people. I mean, the statistics are huge in favor of doing this. And right now, this summer, there's a new procedure out that's similar to a sonogram, or not sonogram, ultrasound type procedure, something similar to that. I forgot what they called it, but which isn't as costly or as invasive as a colonoscopy, but will still show the physician those polyps. And then if there are, then they can go do the colonoscopy and remove them. So I'm hoping that new procedure will help us advance that bill this year.
You have to have a co-author in the House.
Yes.
You already have someone.
Yeah,
by
in
now.
fact, our rules are we have to have an author in the House before we can have it heard in committee.
Okay. So you've already done that.
Right.
I guess that's kind of hard to do sometimes too, to find someone that's willing to.
Sometimes. Now, if it's an idea that I want to do that I've just thought about, read about, or whatever, then I'm going to have to go find someone. If it's a group, like if it's the American Cancer Society that brings me a bill and they want me to author this legislation, then I agree to it. They'll go find the House author.
Okay.
So you don't have to spend time getting authors for every one of your bills.
Well, and with the split with the co-chairs now, the committee's a little bit different too, I guess, because of that with the split. Is this the
It's
first
a lot
time?
harder to get bills heard. I know that.
Oh, okay.
Because instead of going to one committee chairman to request a bill, you got to go to two.
Are visitors allowed to come listen to some of those discussions, committee meetings?
Oh, absolutely. They're open. They're subject to the Open Meetings Act. They're open to the public. And we have two committee meeting rooms here in the Senate side, 419C and 511A, that are wired over the internet, that you can view them over your computer. Now they have sound hooked up in the chamber of the House. We have audio and video on the Senate floor, as well as those two meeting rooms.
I'm gonna have to into some of that.
Yes.
Get time to do that. You co-chair of the Oklahoma Women's Legislative Caucus. At some point, I don't know if you still are. I just had one of my notes was that. And legal women voters. What is you're a member of that? Too,
Well, yeah,
have
I think my dues are probably due again. I joined it a few years ago, and they just really haven't done a whole lot here in Oklahoma County.
I've seen other
Because I
people
talked
say
to a
that.
lady here a while back. I said, I know I haven't gotten a newsletter. I'm sure my dues are due. You know, what are y'all doing? Well, we're kind of reorganizing. And I had really gotten involved with them earlier through a friend, and kind of through a dare. Because that one year that I first joined, I was vice chair of the state Democrat Party, and the vice chair of the Republican Party had joined, and so I kind of joined on a dare. It was kind of like there were people trying to get both of us to join, and we just said, "I will if she will," or "I will if she will."
In most states, what do they do then? If they were active, what sort of things would they?
Well, the League of Women Voters, at least in Oklahoma, I know in the past, has been a very nonpartisan group. And they have been very involved in, or they were, in getting information out to voters about candidates, about voting procedures, just, good solid information that you can get an election board pretty much, but, they kind of acted as another caveat to do that. And they also hosted a number of debates, statewide, congressional type debates.
Pushing women's issues or?
Not so much.
family issues?
Not so much that I saw here in Oklahoma. I think some other states they may have, but so they haven't done much in the last year or so.
No, we need to change that too. Hillary needs to come get in check. Okay. What's been your most memorable event during this whole, since December of '03?
Memorable event?
Yeah, connected to the legislature. Yeah, I mean, getting one bill passed, or a particular constituent that you were able to successfully help.
There's so many events that happen in
One or
the
two.
life and day of a legislator. Well, I know one weekend I showed up at a church for a couple's 60th wedding anniversary that I'd gotten word from a family member about, and we do these little certificates, congratulations and stuff, and I showed up to present one to them at their anniversary, and you'd have thought I'd have handed them a pot of gold or something. I mean, they were just so tickled. They were just so appreciative. And it's such a little thing to do, Doesn't take that long to do one, or spend the time to go over there for a little while, and that was just marvelous. Or run into someone in the grocery store that you helped them with a problem with an agency or some service they were needing, and they come up and thank you and hug you, and that makes it all worthwhile. Let me tell you, it really, really does. But if I had to say as far as a big event, I have hundreds of those little ones. I mean, they're just marvelous. Was the Centennial Day. I mean, that was such an historic day. And I was in Williamsburg, Virginia earlier this summer, and they were celebrating their 400th birthday.
Okay.
And I remember being there and being back in the part of the country where our country began. And some of that part of the country still looks like it did back in those days. And thinking, wow, and here we're just hitting our 100th birthday, and they're celebrating 400. And looking at how much we've done in 100 years. And when I hear some Oklahomans complain about this isn't going right in our state, this isn't going right in our state, boy, I tell you, I go to conferences and I hear what other states are doing or not doing, and I'm going, we are so much better off than a lot of states in so many ways. I was at a conference here in the city where Council of State Governments a few weeks ago, and I was bragging about our VOTEC system, for example. We've got one of the best in the country and have had for a number of years, and other states are still struggling with that and trying to get people retrained and get kids into VOTEC that aren't college bound or whatever. And so I'm going, wow, we've been doing that for a long time here in Oklahoma. And talking about our new OOHRP program, about where the state pays a large portion of insurance to get more businesses to insure their employees. It's still relatively new, but we've begun that trail, and And this is something other states are still trying to figure out how to do. So we've got a lot of good things going for us here in Oklahoma. Again, looking at how we've progressed in 100 years, and right now in the time of the city here in Oklahoma City, I'm very proud of what our city's done. I mean, we've literally transformed this city in the last decade. You know, I moved here in the early 70s, back when East Reno was nothing but salvage yards. And now look, it's part of Bricktown and all that wonderful stuff down there. It's absolutely gorgeous. And, you know, we're rebuilding our schools, and we're investing in our infrastructure. And so a lot of good things are happening around us. And I've had visitors from out of state in the last couple of years that I've just taken great pride in showing off our city.
You can tell a little bit more about the
Train trip into Guthrie for the Centennial. No one else has mentioned
Oh, they
that
haven't.
experience. So,
I got goosebumps. I just thought it was the neat deal, you know.
and they did
And-
a wedding too.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And just the, you know, and being there in that hall where the first legislature was, you know, it was ceremonial for us, but I just got goosebumps. Like, wow, this is where it started. This is where they really were. You know, a lot of the folks in Guthrie were dressed colonial style, and by the era rather, and made it very realistic, you know. And they just did a really good job. The citizens of Guthrie just did fabulous for that day.
and when the next day that you came into this building, did you have similar type thoughts? That the feeling that now it's your turn.
Yeah, well, it made me think about, well, we were reflecting what we've done for the past 100 years. So what are we going to lay the groundwork for the next 100 years? You know, not just my kids' generation, but we need to be thinking about how we can make the state better. And again, if nothing else, lay some groundwork to start building, to keep the state moving forward. Like Oklahoma City, we want to do things to keep the city moving forward. We need to be doing that for the state too. And I think some of it's going to take some major changes that are going to be difficult.
Let's go back just a little bit. Your husband was in when the Murrah bombing happened.
Right.
Do you remember much about those few days?
Yes, I do. Actually, for 21 days, I worked for the state medical examiner's office then. And I didn't see much of my family for 21 straight days. My kids were still in school. That was a horrible time for our city, for the state for that matter. Yeah, I was working down there, and I was personnel director, but I got put in charge of supplies and some other things. And we worked. I did get to go home a little bit during that time, but we spent a lot of long hours down there. It wasn't but a few days before the city knew we were not in a rescue mode. We were in recovery mode, and that was a very sad time. And what was it? 162 bodies, I believe. So, you know, but through that whole horrible experience, the whole nation saw what great people we have in Oklahoma. You know, they called it the Oklahoma Standard, by how the rescue workers that came from out of state didn't even have to ask for anything. It was given to them. You know, if they did ask for a bottle of water, they'd get 10 bottles of water. Even where I was working, we had people show up with supplies and things that we didn't even ask for. But that's just how the people of this state have always been. They'll give you the shirt off their back and then some.
Was he in the Capitol that day?
He was in the Capitol that day, and I remember that morning shortly after the bomb went off and we knew what had happened, I was trying to call him. We had phone lines down, though, for a few hours. You know, you couldn't get out anywhere. It was before we had the good cell phones you have now. They had the old, what do you call it, that you could plug into your car, but they weren't working either. So it was a few hours before we had phone service, before I could get word to him where I was at, that I was not going to be home anytime early. And I wanted to make sure he could either pick up the kids or get someone to pick up the kids. And I knew they'd be worried because I'm sure they had heard about it but didn't know where Mom was at that time. You know, I said they were both in school, and my youngest one was still in grade school. And sure enough, you know, a few days later, when I did get back home, they were, and see them, they were in bed. The first time I went home, they were both in bed asleep early the next morning. And they said, we knew a bomb went off somewhere near downtown, and we knew you were near downtown, and we didn't know where you were. And then Dad finally said, well, your mom's okay, she just has to work. Yeah, it was. It really was. You know, he knew I was okay because he knew I wasn't near the building, but it was several hours, like I said, before I could really talk to him.
Plus, they didn't know if there were more.
Well, that time we had no idea that first day how many fatalities we could expect. The first report I know that we got at our office was that because it was a federal building, that there could have been up to 500. You know, but not knowing how many were in that day, we didn't know that, I think, till the next day or two, before they started narrowing the numbers down as far as the missing.
Well, in that first couple hours, they didn't know if there was another bomb somewhere else.
That's right, too, yeah, because they evacuated at that one point.
Capitol, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's a moment in history most of us
Yeah.
will remember.
Yeah. And we didn't have metal detectors up here, and I remember before that even happened, I had made comments to him about, anybody can walk in the state capitol and carry anything in that building. Aren't you guys ever worried about that? You know?
Well, do you guys have to come through it too?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I don't have a problem with it.
No, I don't either.
I'm glad it's there.
Do the Human Services places have them too? Department of Human Services, do you know?
Well, I haven't been over to their department.
I was just curious if other state agencies. So they did initially for some places, but they may have
Mhm.
changed that right now. Well, I don't have any other questions unless you want to make sure if I've forgotten to ask something.
Gee, what a question.
I have one last one if you don't have anything else you want to.
What's your last one then?
When history's written about you, what would you like for it to say?
Oh,
Not an easy one.
no, that's not a very easy one. I don't. Not used to talking about myself like that. I suppose I'd probably want them to say that I showed courage and conviction in what I did when I did it, and that I was true to my word. If you're not true to your word out here in this building, you're not any good.
I'd probably add one more, that you've walked with your people. Right?
Yes, I have.
To go with your campaign sign.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes beside, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, I guess.
Well, you know, I had someone early in my first session, or second session, I can't remember which now, anyway, commented about how she had always been told that my husband had always supported all my political activities, even when I think I probably sometimes caused him a few headaches. And I said, yeah, he always did encourage me. And the reporter that was in the room at the time said, probably because all the years you walked behind him or something, you know, behind every great man there's a great woman. I said, but you know what? I said, no, I said, I always walked beside him. He never made me feel any less.
I think you filled the shoes well, and that your people are lucky to have you up here.
Well, I'm the lucky one. I've got a great district. The people out there are just wonderful. They're just down-to-earth folks, and they're just, you know, working and trying to take care of their families and trying to take care of each other. And my part of town, I've always loved it. It's got that small town feeling. That's why I've always liked the South Side. It's got that small town feeling. That people there are just very genuine and very caring, and they kind of look after each other.
Well, you got their back up here.
I sure try.
Well, thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed this. I really have.